Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Glad to have you on board. I'm Rabbi Eskovitz, and I'm teaching a class that emphasizes the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, and with also Mishlei, which written by the same author, King Solomon. And in between, I'll give you some quotes from the Ethics of the Fathers called Pirkei Avot. So there are many things that King Solomon tells us that are applicable even up to the moment. For instance, I heard on TV that 3 million people have already used our plane system to go for prepare, to visit during the during Thanksgiving. 3 million people in 3 days are using the airplanes, even though our doctors have been warning us you should not be traveling anywhere. That it's very dangerous. The COVID is completely out of control, and yet 3 million people have actually put themselves in great danger. And would King Solomon have said anything about that? That's the question you must ask yourself. Would he have said something about that situation? And you can bet that he did. And this, of course, is a reminder of how human nature is rather inconsistent. Because normally we would think that people who have intelligence would know not to put themselves in danger, and yet people traveling by plane for the last 3 days, and there'll be many more than 3 million, are doing that. So we're going to see that he will talk about that, and we'll see he has many other contemporary issues in mind. Okay, so looking on the sheet from King Solomon, in chapter 6, verse 10, he says the following: better is what the eye see than what is imagined. Okay, in Hebrew, tov mare einayim mehalach nafesh, meaning that when we see things, our imagination takes over, and we believe what we see and don't often look beyond what we see. And that explains why people who have something of value tend to imagine it being worth more and more. And last week I talked to you about people who have $100 are not happy with $100 because they can imagine that it'll be 200. And the same people who have 200 imagine that it could be $400. So King Solomon is saying that it's our imagination which tricks us into doing very foolish things. And the eyes see something, and imagination says, I like what I see. I think I can imagine this even being better. And the end result could be very, very sad. So I remember one of the people who was getting on the plane for the Thanksgiving holiday was asked, are you sure you're doing the right thing? And his answer was that he said he was 64 years old and he didn't know when he'd ever have another opportunity to celebrate Thanksgiving with family. So he felt this was a good decision. But obviously, he wasn't thinking of the fact that maybe there wouldn't be another opportunity because he's choosing to go by plane and put himself in so much danger. Okay, so again, I would like to emphasize better is what the eyes see than what is imagined. And this is true in almost every situation, that people imagine that what is in front of them is going to get better and better. And I think an excellent example is after a long day of feeling very hungry, and you get to dessert, and you say, well, I am so hungry. If one dessert is good, then two or three would even be better. And a person doesn't realize that one thing follows another, and that it's very easy to eat too many desserts and become very ill or gain weight from allowing the eyes to deceive us. But this is one of the problems with human nature, that we fool ourselves because what we see is not just a vision, but it's our imagination. And you may recall in the story of the Garden of Eden, when Eve is all by herself in the garden, and the serpent speaks to her and tells her that God doesn't want her to know the secret of his wisdom, and that's why she should not be eating from the tree of knowledge. And the Torah describes how beautiful this fruit is, and we don't know which fruit it is, but it's beautiful, and it looks like it really would make you much more intelligent. And because her eyes saw something of beauty and her imagination took over, she ended up eating from the forbidden fruit, and that got her evicted from the Garden of Eden. So this is really what happens to people on a daily basis. We see something, we imagine that if we had it, we'd be much happier. If we had $1 million, we'd be the happiest people on the earth. 2 million, even better. 3 million, etc. But studies have actually been done about people who win lotteries, and they find that it's true that when people win a lottery, they are very, very happy until the time comes for them to collect their prize. Once they collect their prize and reality sets in, they no longer have that feeling that it's going to be a wonderful life, because they realize they have to pay taxes. Many of the people who never were friendly are now friendly, that it's very easy to spend what you gain. And the end result is that the people who win these great prizes rarely walk away feeling happy, because reality steps in. So that's the wisdom of King Solomon, saying the eyes see, and we imagine things better than they are. And he has another verse in chapter 6, which says, all man's toil is for his mouth, yet his wants are never satisfied. Meaning that he's saying that people basically work and work and work so they can survive. They want to have food on the table. Yet it's rare that people feel satisfied with all the effort they're putting into. It doesn't really get them where they want to be. Okay. So another verse that in chapter 7, the first verse is, a good name is better than good oil. Okay. Oil was used to rub the body, so as to make, like giving a rub down. It was used in ancient times for that purpose. Oil was a personal pleasure. And yet he says a good name is better than good oil, meaning that good oil, it feels good while you're using it, and then you have to move on. But a good name goes with you wherever you are. You always have your good name. Okay, interestingly enough, the rabbis say that somebody who is well liked by people, a man or woman who is well liked by people, and this is in the ethics of the fathers, is well liked by God. Okay, or the Hebrew would be kol sharuach habrio nocha emenu ruach hamakom nocha himen. That if people like you, that's probably a good sign that God likes you, because if people don't like you, that means you must be offending people left and right. And God doesn't like when we offend our fellow humans. Okay, and that explains why one of the great mitzvahs of the Torah is to love your neighbor as yourself, to learn to accept the fact that God put us in a world where He wants us to get along with everyone, men and women, and where we end up being disliked by people, that means that God is unhappy with us as well. However, the rabbis warn us that sometimes we try too hard to make people happy, and we can violate many important laws of the Torah by making everyone happy in the wrong way. Okay. Furthermore, he says in the very same verse, the day of death is better than the day of birth. Now, what could he mean by that? He's telling us that when people are born, we're very happy for the new person, but we really don't know what they're going to do with their lives. We don't know if they're going to be a help to humankind or a hindrance. What comes to mind is there was a very infamous villain named Joseph Stalin of Russia, and the head of the Communist Party, which killed tens of millions of innocent Russians. And when he was born, his family was very happy, and they were preparing him to go to study for the priesthood. And had he achieved his dream of becoming a Greek Orthodox priest, he might have added a great deal of spirituality to the world. He might have helped people and comforted people. But in his last year of school, of theological school, he decided to go into politics, which became a terrible, terrible situation for the rest of mankind. As I said before, he killed millions, tens of millions of Russian people, and very evil. And so at the time of his death, we see that he really was no one to be proud of. On the other hand, most of us, we live a life which hopefully earns us a certain kind of respect. And when people think of you at the end of your life, and that's exactly how we remember people when we go into a cemetery. We look at the epitaph, and we look at, we remember the person, and we remember, was this person someone that we liked or didn't like? Was it somebody who really did much good for others? And this is what King Solomon means, that the day of death is the day we know how a person lived their life. And too many people did not live their lives in a way that would be beneficial to the rest of mankind, and not even to their own family. Okay. Taking you a little further, King Solomon says in chapter 7, do not say, how was it that former times were better than these? For that is not a question prompted by wisdom. In other words, people say, I remember the good old days. King Solomon says there were no good old days. What you remember in the good old days really weren't as good as you imagined, but you're forgetting what happened then. And this is something that people tend to do where, again, they're fooling themselves. When people are very young, we think that they had no problems, they had energy, but many young people are very unhappy. People at any stage of life can be very unhappy. And we find in the Torah itself that one of the 10 challenges that the Jewish people faced was when they remembered the good old days in Egypt when they were given fish and fruits and vegetables, and the Torah lists everything that they remembered. But the reality is they never were given any of that. They were slaves. They were treated terribly. But in their imagination, they saw the challenges of going through the wilderness as being so frightening that they forgot that when they were slaves in Egypt, they weren't better off. They were much worse off. In fact, in their travels through the desert, the people actually were provided with food from heaven called the manna, and there was a water supply available, and God made miracles all the time and protected them from their enemies. Yet people always say, this moment is terrible, but years ago, life was so much better. King Solomon says, don't believe it. People have a way of exaggerating that just can't possibly be true. We just have this weakness within our imagination to always assume that where we are now is bad, but the old days were always better. In verse 15, in verse 16 of chapter 7, he says, do not be overly righteous or excessively wise. Do not be overly righteous. What's wrong with being righteous? Righteous is a good place to be. Righteous is where you do the right thing for the right people. And yet King Solomon says, be careful. If you're overly righteous, you're going to do a great deal of harm. How can that possibly happen? If you're doing the good thing, it's going to be a good thing. It can't be a bad thing. And King Solomon says, oh, yes, it is. It can be a terrible thing. How is that? And well, an example would be when King Saul was told by the prophet Samuel that the enemy, there was a war going with the enemy, and that the enemy was very anti-Semitic. The Amalekites, they had a hatred of Jews that would never quit. And in fact, Haman in the Purim story is an example of somebody who hated just one person, Mordecai, and then he hates all Jews. He wants all of them destroyed. So, the Bible tells us that when King Saul had defeated the anti-Semites, the Amalekites, he decided to spare the life of the king because of his age, thinking that there was no reason, to in any way harm the king. Let him live. He could not do any harm. But the prophet Samuel showed him that he had done a terrible, terrible thing, because had King Saul, killed the evil king at the right time, then the king would not have had an opportunity to continue his family, and he managed to impregnate a young lady, another Amalekite, who ultimately becomes the mother of Haman. So the point is, when you're good, be good, but don't be so good. And in a joking fashion, the best example I can think of is if somebody walks up to you with a gun and says, give me your money or I'm going to kill you, and they drop the gun, it falls down, and you say, I want to be a righteous person, so you pick up the gun and you give it back to the person and say, here, this is your gun. Now that sounds like a good idea if you want to be overly righteous, but it may turn out that they'll shoot you anyway. So do not be overly righteous. Al titzadik harbe. Do not be too righteous, because it will affect what is going to happen. Now, in this same regard, people will make mistakes in trying to protect other people. and that's why they're overly righteous. And an example, of course, would be if you look in the Torah, the story of Adam and Eve, where God says to Adam, do not eat from the tree of knowledge. And again, remember what I said, we do not know which tree that was. We don't know that it was, the Romans claim it was an apple tree, but the rabbis would not buy that at all. Nevertheless, the Bible does not tell us what fruit it was. So Adam says to Eve, to protect her from making a mistake, he says to her, remember, we may not eat from the fruit, nor may we touch the tree. If we touch the tree, we will violate God's command. Now, he was doing that to protect her from making a mistake and eating the forbidden fruit. But God never said you couldn't touch the tree. But Adam made it sound like that was God's, message. So when Eve eventually does touch the tree of knowledge and nothing happens, she thinks that, well, maybe if she eats the fruit, only something good will happen, like the serpent had mentioned. And it turns out to be a big mistake. And so that's an example of not being overly righteous. Adam should have warned Eve that what he was telling her was his idea, not God's idea. Okay, in the same verse, it tells us, do not be excessively wise. Do not be excessively wise. Okay, and in the Hebrew, it's really beautiful. Al titchatam yoter. And what could that possibly mean? What's wrong with being excessively wise? Well, imagine. Sometimes you go beyond what wisdom would ask you to do, and you come to certain conclusions that would be very, very anti-spirituality, because you're thinking, I have a better system which will save the day. Okay, so I'll give you an example. King Solomon would tell you that although you want to protect yourself from intruders, and you will say, well, I think I will keep a weapon in my home to scare off any intruders. What unfortunately has happened too many times is that weapon was picked up by a child, and I know of cases like this. It's very unfortunate. Child, thinking it's just a toy, would pull the trigger and kill either a sibling or a parent because they didn't realize the danger of the situation. But the adults have to realize that in case somebody mistakenly picks up a loaded weapon, it can lead to a terrible end. So this is, again, King Solomon reminding us that we should not be overly wise, overly smart, because by so doing, it usually ends up being a catastrophe. So what we have going on here, whether we look in the book of Proverbs or the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to discover that King Solomon is making many statements which are suggesting that we can make big mistakes in life by not thinking correctly. And at the same time, he says that even when we think correctly, we cannot achieve perfection on a human level. What that means is that many of our greatest leaders attempted to achieve, spirituality, perfect spirituality, and to go through life without offending God in any way. King Solomon is going to tell us that there is no person who has ever gone through life who did not commit some major violation. And he's not saying that they did it on purpose, but it's very easy to misjudge situations. And even great leaders like Moses and Abraham and Jeremiah, and the greatest of our rabbis, you usually find that somehow a mistake was made in their thinking. They were trying to do the right thing, and it ended up being the wrong thing. So I'm reminded of something rather comical to me, that when it says in the book of Job that God has no faith in his holy ones, meaning the angels, even they don't always think clearly. Okay, and what comes to my mind is a true story. When God sends angels to Abraham to cure him after he had gone through the circumcision, and to inform Sarah that she was going to have a baby a year later at Passover time. So during that time, the three angels were supposed to do their job as God had commanded them, but each of the angels made a big mistake. The first mistake was made by the angel, Michael, who was supposed to tell Sarah directly that she would have a baby, but he spoke to her outside, when he was outside of her tent. He was in Abraham's tent, and she was in her own tent, and he spoke so she would hear him saying, "You will have a baby." However, she didn't know it was an angel, and when she denied it, she actually hurt herself by not believing that God could make a miracle for her. But the fact that she really didn't know it was an angel. Had he done his job right, he would have informed her that he was an angel, but she didn't know. Secondly, when the other two angels go to Sodom to save Abraham's family, that would be Lot, and his wife and daughters, the mistake that the angels make as they're whisking Lot and family off to safety is they make this mistake of saying, "You have to go with us immediately." In the Hebrew, because we are destroying the city, the city of Sodom, and you must leave immediately. And the rabbis point out that the angels claimed to be doing what God was doing. They were not the ones who were actually destroying Sodom. Their ability to destroy was a gift from God, and they were claiming to be able to do something on their own that really they couldn't do. So they were being arrogant, and they were punished for that. So King Solomon, and I'm going to end up now, is telling us that when anyone, no matter how spiritual they are, when they try and reach for perfection, it just doesn't happen. And everybody, including your neighbors and your great-great-grandparents, as pious as you believe them to have been, they too have made mistakes in their spirituality. It's human. God forgives you if you repent of your mistakes, but it's impossible to go through life without having made one or many mistakes, because we're really imperfect, and God understands, but we must understand that we can do a great deal of harm. So that's what I would like to share with you is from King Solomon, and I want to wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving. And remember, imagination can be very destructive. So remember, one dessert sounds good. Try not to fly. It is dangerous. And have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi, can I ask you something?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so I'm up here in Michigan watching you on Zoom. When you make a reference, could you tell us whether it's Kohelet or Mishlei that you're
yeah, I'm at this point I'm basically working out of Kohelet.
Okay.
Everything I'm saying right now is Kohelet. I will get back to Mishlei. Although last year I was teaching Mishlei, and now I wanted to give you a little taste of what Kohelet is saying, but it's the same person.
Yeah.
describing what challenges we face in life and how we can be overly wise to our disadvantage or overly righteous or religious, and there's a happy medium. That's what he's trying to say.
Right. I really wanted to be at your Mishlei class last year in Florida, but it I don't know. I don't know. I think it was just a bad time of day. But I learned Mishlei here with my kavrusa. We got almost to the end, so
Oh, good. Good.
I'm looking forward to doing it again because you can't learn so much just from one
I
time.
will be getting back to Mishlei.
Okay, but Kohelet is wonderful too to learn.
Okay.
Thank you.
For
Thank you
sitting
very
on the
much.
Okay, shalom everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Mordechai, can you hear me?
Oh my goodness, I didn't recognize you with that. What's that? Tefillin on your head?
Yeah.
Okay, your tefillin are different than mine.
Anyway, it came through nice and clear. I was able to follow it fine.
Good.
Okay, the only other thing, as Cherna was saying, when you cite